FM, The Source.
All right, 24 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. When I was a kid, my father was a policeman, and he used to come home in his uniform, and I used to watch him take off the belt with the gun on it, and I always thought, wow, he's like a hero. He must be out there getting bad guys all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then when I got older, I learned that he had been in World War II. Mm-hmm. And the older I got, the more I realized that those men and women who served in World War II on the Allied side, who defeated the Nazis, they were the real supermen of the time, the supermen and women of the time, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what Hitler was doing, what the Nazis were doing was so horrible that had they not been defeated, the world, oh my gosh, it would have been hell on earth instead of heaven on earth, right?
Yes, it would have been.
And it was for many of the people who were caught in that whole trap. On the phone is Dr. Judy Stone. She has written a book called Resilience. She herself is a physician specializing in infectious diseases, but the book is because she's the daughter of a Hungarian Holocaust survivor, or plural, survivors, right?
Right.
She's a contributor to Scientific American. She's a Forbes Pharma and Healthcare contributor. And the book, Resilience, is one family's story of hope and triumph over evil. On Amazon, it describes Dr. Stone as the daughter of Hungarian survivors of Auschwitz and Dachau. I never know how to say that. And it tells the story of her family's strength and resilience during some of the most horrific events of the 20th century. Let's find out about the book and about the story in the book. Dr. Judy Stone, it's an honor to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you both for having me on.
You're welcome.
That.
You got such a sweet voice. Where are you?
I'm in Maine.
Everybody in Maine has a sweet voice. I'm teasing. So are the people we're talking about your mom and dad?
Yes, my mom was in Auschwitz along with two of her sisters, and my father and his brother were in forced labor and then in Dachau,
wow,
which was another horrendous camp. And one of the things I learned is how unique it was that so many people in one family survived the Holocaust.
Did they talk about it ever when you were little, or at least a teen? Did it come up?
No, the room went silent when the kids walked in. My parents did not speak about it until I was in high school. My mother slipped up and mentioned that she'd had a third child, which I'd never heard about. And then she told me a little bit more about that in college. But they made a point of not talking about it.
Really? Was the third child the child of the...
It was my parents, and my mother lost her first baby in the ghetto. And
because of the attacks?
Because of starvation and exposure.
Okay.
They were getting ready to be deported from the Debrecen ghetto to Auschwitz, and they were outside in the rain in a brickyard for some great period of time.
How did they mentally survive? Could they visualize a better future?
Well, I wondered the same thing, particularly after she lost her baby. But one of the things that helped them, I learned, was the kindness of various people who helped save their lives. For example, my aunt, the baby sister in the family, was also found that my mother was in Auschwitz, and she managed to change barracks with another woman so that she could help care for my mother. And that love from her sister is part of what kept her going. There were other kindnesses from other people that were similar.
One of the scenes from the movie Schindler's List shows a Nazi on a rooftop just shooting one of the workers simply because they were tired and they weren't working as much as that guy on the roof thought they should be working. So your life, if you were in one of those camps, was expendable or disposable, whatever. Did they have any stories like that happened to the people that were with?
Absolutely. And for my mother, the women had to always be in rows of 5 wherever they were walked or for roll call, and if anybody dropped behind, they were shot and killed. And on the death march, which happened when the Nazis knew that they were losing and forced people to march hundreds of miles in the cold and with no food. On that death march, my mother was so weak that she could barely walk, and yet younger women, stronger women, took the outside to shield her from view of the soldiers. Same thing happened with another aunt, where again some of the other prisoners actually helped carry her on the death march.
How old was she at that time?
My Aunt Kitty was 19 when she was taken to Auschwitz. My mother was in her early 30s. My mother was the oldest.
Okay, yeah, and you could imagine that the walk would have been very hard. Even 30 seems young, but not walking hundreds of miles if you're not used to it. Did your mom and dad know each other at that time?
My parents were married when they were taken into the camps and separated.
Oh, okay.
And so another miracle was that they found each other afterwards, and the two families reunited and stayed close. They had been friends since teenage years, and then remained close throughout their lives.
Well, you talk about, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but Boji?
Yeah, Betty.
Yeah, she helped. She was like the savior of some women. Go ahead.
No. Well, various people had acts of resistance and kindness that helped save others. One of the things that they talked about was how sharing food in the camps saved people's lives and was an act of resistance, actually. And this then in turn was repaid when people helped them when they were weaker. Betty was also involved in trying to help smuggle munitions in the camp.
And you also talked about the Mulder River.
Right. That's where she was liberated. And the women on that particular death march were given a choice of going to the Russians or to the Americans on the different sides of the river, and the Russians had a reputation for raping women, and so they elected to go to the Americans, but they had to climb a rope. Can you imagine? You're 65 pounds, you're so starved, and you have to climb a rope ladder to get up to the American soldiers. And again, the women helped each other, and when they got near the top, the soldiers helped them up. And Betty talks about how even though they were filthy and covered with lice, how wonderful the Americans were to them that liberated them.
I'm glad to hear that. Doesn't that make you proud when you hear that? That's so were you able to, are your mom and dad still with us?
No, my Aunt Kitty, who just turned 95, and she actually, I don't know if you read the part, but she hid that she was Jewish from 1947 when she came to the States until 2008, when there was a celebration or story about survivors and their liberators in the Omaha area. And at that point, she spoke publicly for the first time about being Jewish, and she's been very, very active in doing Holocaust education since 2008. It's really quite remarkable to watch her in action.
I like the fact that the members of your family that survived the concentration camps, that when they did make it here, even though they had all of these hurdles to overcome, and some of them were poor in their upbringing, that they encouraged all of their children to succeed and stand on their own 2 feet. That was pretty amazing.
Well, education was paramount for all of them, even though they were poor in their village. Education was always emphasized, and self-sufficiency. And another thing that I see now as a recurrent theme in my family and other books I'm reading is that part of what helped my mother and her sisters survived is all the hard physical work they had to do growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So she said the people who were wealthy and sat there drinking tea and having their crumpets didn't survive.
I love that comparison. Yeah, I love that comparison.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you know one thing that always boggles my mind is how the people who followed the orders of the upper echelon in the Nazis, I don't even like the word echelon in that context, but Hitler and those in charge, how did anybody ever follow those orders? I just hope that we as a human species have learned that a moron can be in control, and once we realize that, we need to take him out of control. I just can't imagine that we don't have enough sense to be able to not follow those orders.
It's happening over and over again.
I know it is, and I don't understand it. How is it possible? And your book and books like yours should be the wake-up call. I mean, everybody should say, this happened once before. You got to pay attention to who your leaders are and ignore them. Don't let them be leaders, first of all. But if they happen to get in there, figure out a way to get them out of there.
Thank you so much, Larry, for recognizing the comparison between then and now. Thank you. One of the things that some of the parallels are just incredibly heartbreaking, particularly for me when I see children caged. And what I flip back to and see is my mother talking about sleeping packed like sardines on the floor in Auschwitz with one filthy thin blanket and getting their one piece of bread and bologna a day.
You also went back to Eastern Hungary, where your family originated from. When you were doing your research there, did they realize you were finding corroboration for the stories?
I wasn't that explicit at the time. I went as a roots trip. I first went with my mother in 1978, and that trip was devastating to her, seeing the things that were stolen from her house. Neighbors said, "Oh, we have the tablecloth on the table where we're eating. This was yours."
Oh my
gosh!
Oh my!
So did your research include letters that you found, or information that you, even though you're your parents' child, that you didn't even know yourself?
Oh, there was a lot that I didn't even know myself. One of the things that the Holocaust Museum helped me with was that I never knew when my grandfather was killed. And in Judaism, you say Yartzeit, a prayer for the dead, on the anniversary of their deaths. And I had no idea when that was. And last year, the Holocaust Museum produced a document about my Aunt Kitty, which the Nazis kept records of when people the dates they were admitted to the camp, biographical information about them. They were quite the record keepers and organized. And on the bottom of this one paper, it had the date she arrived at Auschwitz. And it stopped me cold, because that was the day that my grandfather was murdered, because the two were together, and he was 65.
Oh, wow.
So he was considered old and expendable, and was killed that day.
Do you think that a lot of German Jews left Germany and just stopped admitting that they were Jewish? Do you think they changed their religion, or just abandoned religion altogether because they saw what was coming?
Again, there was denial, and even in Hungary, my family did not view themselves as Jews primarily. They viewed themselves as Hungarian citizens. They didn't speak Yiddish. They observed Jewish traditions, but they identified as being Hungarian, not Jews. And it was the same in Germany. And so in the 1930s, when suddenly the Germans emphasized the us versus them thinking, and first they persecuted the Jews, and then people with disabilities, and then anybody who wasn't blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan, as they say. So, that pattern happened then, and it's the same thing happening now.
It seems like to be strong, you have to have a lot of hope, and you have to make sure not to break your soul. And it seems that's what happened to your family. They latched on to both of those.
It's remarkable. There were certainly times where they didn't, but in the end, being with people that they knew or with relatives helped them survive. And these acts of kindnesses that people did gave them hope.
I have a question about your expertise in infectious diseases and applying that to the Holocaust. Were there infectious diseases that wiped out portions of those people in those camps that maybe wasn't even documented, just maybe from your observation, does it look like that?
Oh, sure. There was dysentery, so diarrhea from the lack of sanitation. There was typhus, which is lice-borne infection that kills many people. And you have to remember, even before the Holocaust, my family all grew up in the pre-antibiotic era. And so they were, significant parts of my family were killed because of foodborne illnesses. And that was quite striking to see, and is one of the reasons, actually, that I write about antibiotic resistance now so passionately, is because if we run out of antibiotics, I can see where that is going to end up, too.
Did that play a role in your choice of career?
I think it did. I've always been fascinated with, actually I've always been wanting to be a helping profession. My father took me with him when he went to make artificial limbs for patients. He was an orthotist and prosthetist, and so I grew up in that environment of needing to be helping. Infectious disease always interested me because it covers from newborns to to old people and all over the world, and you never get bored studying infections.
You're donating your proceeds to entities that promote the Holocaust education, and I really commend you for that.
Well, thank you. I felt it important to honor my family that way and to pay it forward.
You also talk about Magnus. Your mom is like a phoenix rising from the ashes, because you had stated that before she realized she was dying, you didn't really have a great grasp on what her and the family went through.
I had some, but every time that I thought she was going to die, she pulled herself up. She was incredibly strong, and she was determined to go on and live, and towards the end of her life to talk about this and make sure that I knew about it. When she was in the hospital, she said, "Get out your computer and start writing."
Wow.
Yeah, I think we have a duty to let the generations after us know about the atrocities that were committed in our lifetimes or in our parents' lifetimes, so that we don't repeat them. I love the fact that your book does that in a real impactful way. The book is called Resilience. What a great title, by the way. One Family's Story of Hope and Triumph Over Evil. If you find it on Amazon, you'll see that it's described. Let me see one of these lines I wanted to read. Understand the lessons we need to learn so that history will not repeat itself. That's one of the lines on the Amazon listing. And you're getting really good reviews, and the book hasn't even come out technically it won't come out till October 1st?
Technically, but it is out now.
Not only is it out, but I have a copy of it, right, Robin?
Yes, we do.
So if I have a listener who would like the one that was sent to us, please call me 622-9622, and I'll set it aside for you. You can come pick it up at the station.
And the fact that the United States itself was very complacent in the 1930s before the U.S. got involved in World War II, they knew what was happening, but nobody over here in the U.S. seemed to be doing anything about it, and that's very, very sad. It makes me angry when I hear that.
Well, you have a good grasp of history, Robin. And again, the U.S. turned back the ship St. Louis, which had 1,000 passengers seeking to escape from Germany, and a quarter of them were murdered when they went back.
Yeah, that is just, it's embarrassing, and it makes me angry that the U.S. would do that.
So I have a question for you as a writer, just a real quick question. I noticed on Amazon that you have another book that you wrote like a decade ago or so called Conducting Clinical Research. Did writing that book, which seems like a practical book, make you say, "Oh my gosh, I can use my"? Did you discover this thing in you that you were able to write and used that discovery to write the new book, Resilience?
Well, the research skills were the same. Okay, in terms of doing the research and documenting it and annotating everything with sources in my book. That is the same skill, but my writing in my textbook and on Forbes is much more academic. I never got out of my medical training that way, and so I had to learn entirely new skills in writing this kind of narrative and making it something that was a compelling story.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us. Again, the book is called Resilience, One Family Story of Hope and Triumph Over Evil. Judy Stone, Dr. Judy Stone is the author. I don't think you're using Dr. your title. MD, it says. Judy Stone, MD. Okay, I see it on there. So what's next for you? Do you have this is not the kind of book you would have a sequel to, but what would you do next? Yeah, I can't imagine, unless it's a good news story, You know what's amazing to me is how the World War II generation, whether they were fighting in the war or were victims of the war, as in your family's case, how the resilience word, that's why I love the word resilient, how they were able to move forward and have lives even after all that hell that they had to go through.
It's astonishing, and they came and reinvented themselves in many ways. Like my father's brother wasn't allowed to go to university because he was Jewish. He wanted to be a mathematician. So he became a lawyer and then couldn't practice, and then he became a jeweler when he first came to this country, and then he too became an orthotist and made braces, and then he went back to school and became a mathematician and a computer scientist and worked at the NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab as a senior scientist.
Wow. How soon after the war did they move to America?
It varied. My parents came in 1949. Kitty was able to come in 1947, and then she was so poor after she settled in Iowa, she wasn't able to see her family again until 1964, which I hadn't realized.
Wow. Judy, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for your interest and appreciation of the book. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for writing the book. I think these kinds of books are necessary. All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. We're hearing from the Acting National Intelligence Director, Joseph McGuire, this morning.